So welcome everyone to our Service Enterprise Information session. My name is Sarah Jane Foltz. I'm the Director of Capacity Building here at Points of Light. As part of my work and the portfolio of things that I do, I have the great pleasure of leading the Service Enterprise program. And I do not do it alone. That is why I have Tracy Lato-Smith on the call to walk through an overview of what is Service Enterprise, some background about the program, and more about what, as an organization, your experience would look like participating in Service Enterprise. And so we'll be happy to answer questions. Please put them in the chat. What we'll do, if I may ask, is that we'll actually go through the presentation, and then at the end, let's have a conversation. And we'll be happy to address your questions or any of the questions that you put in the chat, and we can talk about it more then. So with that, I would please love to turn it over to Tracy to introduce herself and get this started.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tracy Lato-Smith. I'm joining you from just outside Denver, Colorado today. I am a volunteer engagement consultant, and I wear a number of different hats with Service Enterprise. I have the pleasure of consulting with Points of Light on administration of the program, and I work with the hubs that work with organizations like yours, and we'll talk about the structure a little bit later. I also work with our local hub here in Colorado called Spark Change Colorado as a Service Enterprise trainer and coach working directly with organizations. So I'm excited that I get to work on both sides of the coin with Service Enterprise. And excited to talk to you today about what this is all about. What is Service Enterprise? So a Service Enterprise is an organization that doesn't just engage volunteers. It operates with a culture of volunteerism, and that enables it fundamentally leverage volunteers and their skills to achieve that organization's social mission. These high-performing organizations have really deeply integrated volunteers into their strategic plan as well as their day-to-day operations, and that helps them to reduce costs, increase efficiency, and improve effectiveness in providing services that help them fulfill their missions in the community. So that's what a Service Enterprise organization is. The goals of the Service Enterprise program, or the main goal of the Service Enterprise program, is to strengthen the capacity of organizations to strategically and effectively engage volunteers to address organizational and community needs. So I'll get into the nuts and bolts of the program in a few minutes here, but I think the biggest takeaway is that Service Enterprise is not a volunteer management training program. It's a change management program that's focused on the value and benefits of engaging volunteers in meaningful and really mission-focused ways. Learning and employing best practices in volunteer engagement is certainly part of the roadmap to becoming a certified Service Enterprise organization. The program itself, which we will describe as we go through today's session, is really about supporting organizations, and to be clear, not just volunteer coordinators, volunteer managers, and volunteer directors, but supporting the whole organization. This part is key. Executive directors, leadership in the organization, those folks must participate in this process. And so our goal is to change the way organizations as a whole think about volunteers and the potential that volunteers hold for improving their organization's operations and strategic plans for addressing community needs. So we'd like to start with a brief video about Service Enterprise. So let me share my audio. And here we go.
So you're sitting at your desk and you're reviewing your list of tasks for the day. With each hour that passes, you mark one task off and yet two more appear. You talk with your team, you talk with your boss, and everyone is having the same problem. As you look at your to-do list, you worry that you're not spending your time efficiently. Some of your responsibilities are foreign to you, and you feel like you're building a bicycle and riding it at the same time. Next month, you have to complete your department's annual budget. You carve out an hour every day to focus on it, but you're distracted by other projects, and math is not your strong suit. You think of your neighbor Sandra, an accountant, and wish she would suddenly appear to take on the responsibility. Now, consider she could appear. Imagine that Sandra, or someone like Sandra, had a role built into your organization to use her specific skill set to serve your organization. With her help, you would focus on what you're good at. You would feel like the work your team is doing is making a tangible contribution to your organization's mission, the same mission that attracted you to join the organization. By engaging Sandra and other skill-based volunteers, your organization could operate as a service enterprise. A service enterprise is an organization that fundamentally leverages volunteers and their skills to achieve its social mission. This means engaging volunteers in every area of your work, from direct service to operations to administration. Research conducted by TCC Group and Deloitte demonstrates that nonprofits operating as service enterprises outperform peer organizations on all measures of organizational capacity, thereby allowing these organizations to more effectively address community needs and operate at almost half the median budget. When an organization leverages volunteers and achieves an effective volunteer management model, not only do they lead and manage their organizations better, but they are also significantly more adaptable, sustainable, and better resourced to do their work, and therefore able to sustainably go to scale. Research conducted by Deloitte identified the following 10 characteristics as consistent and critical practices for nonprofit service enterprises. Planning and development. Developing a strategy and infrastructure for mission-driven volunteer engagement. Leadership support. Demonstrated executive commitment to volunteer engagement. Resource allocation. Allocation of resources, time, money, human capital, and tools to volunteer engagement. Tracking and evaluation. Determining service value, tracking volunteer retention, assessing the quality of volunteer experiences, and monitoring the outputs and outcomes of volunteers in meeting the mission of the organization through a volunteer tracking system. Outreach. Ongoing outreach and volunteer recruitment to sustain ongoing volunteer engagement. Funding. Fund development for volunteer engagement. Effective training. Train volunteers and the employees that manage them to effectively fill their positions. Onboarding and supervision. Matching volunteers to appropriate positions, clarifying their roles, orienting and supporting them throughout their time with the organization. Technology and communication. Using best practices in technology and communication to enhance volunteer engagement. Partnering to extend reach. Creating a participatory and mutually beneficial relationship with the community to increase community engagement and reach. The Service Enterprise Initiative is a California volunteer social innovation inspired by reimagining service and led by Points of Light. The Service Enterprise Initiative strengthens the capacity of organizations through a comprehensive research-based assessment, training, coaching, and certification model. Organizations introducing the initiative to agencies in their community are witnessing fundamental changes to how they are strategically engaging volunteers. This initiative is a collaborative effort made possible with the innovative leadership of California volunteers, California Volunteer Centers, the Corporation for National and Community Service, Points of Light, and the dedication of TCC Group, Algorithm, Deloitte, and RGK Center for Philanthropy and Community Service. To learn more about this initiative, go to www.pointsoflight.org/service-enterprise-
All right. Sorry, that got cut off there a little bit at the end. But that gives you a little bit of an overview of what this is all about and what a service enterprise is. Oh, there's the end of her sentence. All right. So wanted to take you through just a little bit of history. Where did this program come from? What's the history and who are the key players? So the Service Enterprise Initiative began back in 2009, and it was based on research that was conducted through a national cross-sector coalition called Reimagining Service, as you heard about in the video there. So working with the TCC Group and Deloitte, Some research was identified that ultimately brought into focus the guiding principles and characteristics of what would ultimately be called service enterprise. And you saw some of those characteristics in the video. We're going to get into the guiding principles in just a minute as well. Then in 2011, California Volunteers, which is the California State Service Commission, worked with local volunteer centers to design a curriculum and then a supporting program that could replicate the research to help organizations move toward becoming what would be certified service enterprise organizations. So with funding from CNCS, the Corporation for National Community Service, which is now AmeriCorps, to California Volunteers, and then planning and development support from Points of Light, which now administers the program, plus the RGK Center at the University of Texas and the TCC Group, the Service Enterprise Program was then built out. It was further developed and piloted in California in 2013. And it included a research-based assessment tool that we called the Service Enterprise Diagnostic, or the SED, which was created by a company called Algorithm. To date, Points of Light has certified and recertified over 640 organizations in 31 states across the United States. So that's a little bit about the history. Now let's dive into the research upon which this program was based and out of which it was created. So the guiding principles for service enterprise. The first of 4 guiding principles is that the volunteer ecosystem is more effective when all sectors participate in its evolution. What we mean by that is that volunteerism doesn't exist in a single sector, and the responsibility for successful volunteer engagement lives beyond just nonprofits. Most of us think of nonprofits when we think about volunteer engagement, but that's not the only space in which volunteers are engaged. Faith-based organizations, school districts, corporations, sports groups, philanthropy, government, and nonprofits all have a really important role to play in achieving better outcomes for our communities. So there's no one portion of the field that can lead this evolution on its own. We all have a part in adopting and supporting more effective practices of volunteer engagement. So that's the first guiding principle. The second guiding principle is to make volunteer engagement a core strategic function of organizations, not just an add-on, not a program over here. So engaging volunteers effectively can help an organization serve more people in the community, and it can also change the core economics of the organization itself. That can allow the organization to scale more quickly when necessary in a more cost-effective way. But far too often, volunteers aren't engaged in strategic ways that add value to our organizations. So a prime example of this is that we typically think of the volunteer program, something separate and apart from the other programs of the organization or real work of the organization. And we think about, and rather than thinking about how to integrate volunteers into all aspects of the organization's work, we think about this as a program, as volunteers as a program over here that can easily be cut or ignored, but not as a critical core function. Think about it this way. Most organizations that have a development department wouldn't think of cutting that fundraising arm when times get tough, but resources that support volunteers are often some of the first things to go. So we need to change the way that we think about volunteers in that respect. The third guiding principle for service enterprise is to focus volunteer engagement on true community needs. Rather than just responding to the supply of volunteers, people who want to help so we find something for them to do, identify key priorities in the community and then purposefully seek out volunteers who have the skills that are needed to address those specific priorities. Again, far too often we let the supply of volunteers dictate, excuse me, we let the supply of volunteers dictate how we engage them, when really the community needs should come first. We think about corporate group volunteers who come and want to help on a regular basis, and we're scrambling to find something meaningful for them to do. And we want to make sure that whenever we engage volunteers, we're engaging them in ways that are truly meaningful to the community. Finally, the fourth guiding principle is that in order to get a return, you have to invest. That's a basic principle of a lot of things, but people don't think about investing in volunteer engagement the way that perhaps we should. Organizations that make volunteers central to their work and manage them well can see 3 to 6 times their return on investment. So this is a really smart way to maximize impact, but it does require upfront and ongoing financial investment in volunteer engagement. We need funders who believe that funding volunteer engagement helps organizations achieve their broader missions, to raise their hands and raise their voices so that the funding community can learn from their stories and start making more investments in this work as well. So those are the guiding principles. Let's look at the research. So using the research that they identified, TCC Group looked deeper at the top performers in volunteer management and 4 other core capacities. So they looked at leadership, adaptability, management, and technical capacities, in addition to overall organizational culture. So they found that only about 11% of organizations were considered what statisticians call positive deviance. Those are the top performers. Only about 11% of organizations were really top performers in these areas. So they changed the name for these top performers from positive deviance to service enterprises. And the researchers discovered 5 critical pieces of information about these positive deviants or service enterprises. So these key findings are, first, that if you manage volunteers well, you're likely doing lots of other things well in your organization also. The second key finding is that organizations that use any number of volunteers and manage them well exhibit stronger leadership and management behaviors. So there's a distinction there between leadership and management, but when you manage volunteers well, you're probably good at those 2 things also. In addition to being better led and managed, service enterprise organizations are significantly more, and you heard this in the video, more adaptable, more sustainable, and more capable of going to scale, which is what most organizations aim to do in order to serve more people in their community, right? The fourth key finding is that service enterprises have strong and well-developed human resources practices. Not really surprising when you think about it, right? Most service enterprises viewed volunteers as unpaid human capital or volunteer employees. So they have paid and unpaid staff, essentially, is the way that they think about it. And this means that they invest the time to define the work that needs to be done by volunteers, to recruit for that work specifically, to train their volunteers, provide adequate supervision and resources, and to recognize the results that their volunteers produce, in addition to promoting volunteers to leadership roles and responsibilities within the organizations. Volunteers have room to grow in service enterprise organizations. And the last key finding is an interesting one because it gets to the economic value of volunteers. The research showed that organizations that engage volunteers are equally as effective as their peers without volunteers, but at almost half the median budget. So you saw this in the video about our 10 characteristics of service enterprise organizations. Building off of the research, Reimagining Service and then Points of Light looked at high-performing organizations to understand both how and why they achieve their top results. And what they did was they were able to identify 10 characteristics as consistent and critical practices for nonprofit service enterprises. And Although all of these characteristics are important, and we dive into all of them throughout the Service Enterprise program, there are 3 of these that are vital to the success of any service enterprise. And those key or hallmark characteristics are planning and development, leadership support, and effective training. So let's talk briefly about some of the benefits of becoming a service enterprise organization, starting with the opportunity for organizations to increase their capacity and their impact through skilled volunteers. So the process of becoming a service enterprise organization will give you the ability to look at internal staff capacity in really sort of a new way, and then leverage skilled volunteers to expand that capacity to achieve your mission. Our data shows that 80% of service enterprises report an increase in both general volunteers as well as skills-based volunteers, which leads to increased capacity. And the program really helps organizations to both identify and address their true needs and the true community needs, and then to integrate volunteers throughout their operations. So service enterprises also have a record of impact. The initial Reimagining Service Council did research showing that for every dollar invested in volunteer engagement, an organization would receive $3 to $6 return on that investment. And we can see that impact and return with service enterprises today through our certification applications of organizations. So we have great impact data that communicates the impact or the value of service enterprises. And every organization that certifies with Points of Light is required to calculate what we call that return on volunteer investment. And that supports the data that service enterprises are getting significant return on that investment. Finally, research has borne out that 92% of our service enterprises said that their organization was better equipped to engage volunteers to meet their mission, and 99% said that they had more effective volunteer practices following service enterprise. So they're doing more with volunteers, and they're doing it more efficiently and effectively. So now let's talk a little bit about the model of service enterprise and the process, exactly what the steps are, what's involved in becoming a service enterprise. So the model for service enterprise aims to help organizations do a number of things. The first of which is to create a culture of volunteerism through change management, helping all members of the organization, not just staff, board members, direct service volunteers, and even in some cases, clients get excited about volunteerism and think differently about what volunteerism can look like in their organization. It also aims to help organizations build capacity by engaging volunteers at all levels, not just in one section or one program of the organization, but throughout the entire hierarchy of that organization. The model certainly is that senior leadership is engaged from the very beginning of the process. This is a key tenet of service enterprise, that leadership support is critical, it is required, and that's from start to finish. Leadership must be involved, engaged, and moving it forward throughout the organization. The process helps to measure organizational readiness accurately using a statistically valid and research-based assessment tool. That's that diagnostic tool I mentioned called the Service Enterprise Diagnostic that all organizations take. They have a number of different stakeholders in their organization take this survey, this assessment survey, and then review it to get a real sense of what's the current landscape in the organization, and then where do we need to go from here in order to become a service enterprise. Organizations receive extensive training and then coaching, personalized one-on-one coaching toward their certification. And they get lots of different exposure to and experience to other sorts of organizations through a cross-sector peer group in cohorts. So if you participate in Service Enterprise, you'll likely be part of a cohort of 3 to 8 organizations going through this process simultaneously, and also learning from one another as you go through it. So here's a glimpse at the actual process. It's Essentially a 7-step process. Organizations start by completing an application and a readiness assessment, and then attending an orientation. That's about a 2-hour orientation, and depending on what's going on in the world, that may be in person or it may be virtual. The next step after the orientation is the diagnostic, or the SED, the Service Enterprise Diagnostic. And this is that online assessment that evaluates an organization's volunteer engagement practices. So this is a really important tool to help the organizations get a baseline understanding of where their organization is with volunteer engagement, and how they can improve to become a service enterprise organization. And after that diagnostic, we have what's called a SED debrief, a diagnostic debrief. And this is about a 2-hour meeting with a trainer or coach from your service enterprise hub that administers the program for your organizations. It's just with your organization and that coach or trainer. And it's after you've completed the diagnostic, we meet and review your individual team's SED results, and really facilitate a robust discussion about the current state of the organization and where you'd like to go through your service enterprise process. So usually some really concrete ideas come out of that discussion, generate some excitement about what's next. And then the next step is this training and coaching phase. So while each of these arrows is about the same size, this is the step in the process that takes up the vast majority of the time in terms of from start to finish, starting the process and then becoming a service enterprise. So training is about 15 hours delivered in either 7 virtual sessions or 4 in-person sessions typically. And during this training, you'll look at things like building board support in your organization for volunteerism, determining your return on volunteer investment, and using that as perhaps an annual benchmark to measure your organization's return on that investment. Maybe defining roles that volunteers can play in your organization, and then also identifying ways to evaluate your progress, as well as evaluate the impact that volunteers are having in your work. So that is the training. And then after training, organizations work with experienced trainers, coaches, and service enterprise consultants to build an organizational action plan to incorporate service enterprise characteristic standards into their organization's culture, their systems, and their processes. So coaching is anywhere between 5 and 10 hours per organization, and the needs of the organization are determined by the organization in partnership with their coach. So part of that is accountability coaching to make sure you're making progress toward the changes that you need to make, and documenting and providing evidence of those changes. But it also can be additional training, additional resources, additional coaching on specific topics that are identified by the organization as particular pain points or areas for growth. Once you've worked through that coaching phase, and that phase, that training and coaching phase can be many months. I mean, some organizations can complete training and certify very quickly in 3 to 6 months. That would be pretty quick. Some organizations take 18 months or 2 years to certify. So it really depends on where the organization is. What other priorities are competing for the organization's attention. But the goal with the coaching is, again, to keep this process moving forward so that your organization can move towards certification. Once an organization has made significant progress toward becoming a service enterprise, they can decide to apply for certification. And so working with their coach, the organizations provide evidence along the way of all the ways in which they've implemented service enterprise best practices. And we have some tremendous tools to help you figure out what to do, where to start, how to document it, and how to get it done. So the time, as I said, the time that it takes to get to certification varies widely depending on the organization. The actual certification process involves a site visit, so to your organization, typically with your coach and a representative from your hub, if those are different people or there may be multiple folks, but it's an opportunity to tell your story, to showcase the changes that you've made and the impact those changes have had on your organization. Your coach and hub will interview the folks who've been integral in the process, but also talk to volunteers, talk to other members of the senior leadership team, to really get a sense of how this has been integrated throughout the organization. And finally, there's this final arrow here is follow-up and continuous improvement. So another key tenet of the Service Enterprise program is a commitment to continuous improvement. So when organizations certify, we fully expect them to have some elements of their action plan that are still in progress or ongoing. And the Service Enterprise certification is a 3-year certification. At the end of 3 years, we ask organizations to apply to maintain their certification and to demonstrate that they're continuing to operate as a service enterprise. So that is the service enterprise process. Just a little bit now about the structure of the program. Points of Light is the owner and certifying body of Service Enterprise. And then Points of Light certifies and contracts with hubs and independent consultants around the country to administer the program. There are currently 20 active hubs across the United States, and maybe 22 when we count independent consultants who sort of operate as floating hubs to support and work with organizations that don't have a local hub or a geographic hub nearby. And then finally, the organizations participate in the program, as I said, typically in cohorts of 3 to 8 organizations, depending on the hub. The hubs take the organization through the program from start to finish. And then after the certification site visit, the hubs are responsible for submitting the certification application and recommendation to Points of Light, who officially certifies each organization. So wrapping up, I just want to highlight that participating in Service Enterprise really offers organizations a chance to develop a new roadmap for moving forward by bringing together key players in your organization to assess the strengths of your volunteer engagement work, take stock of emerging challenges, as well as prioritize what's important for the organization and set a timeline for tackling those priorities. And finally, gaining new tools for working together to improve systems for volunteer engagement so that you're really ready to thrive in the face of whatever is ahead, which we know none of us can predict. All right. So next steps, I'm going to turn it over to SJ to talk about next steps if you're interested in learning more or pursuing becoming a service enterprise.
Thank you so much, Tracy, for that overview. And so if you're finding this interesting and want to know more, I'll put the link in the chat, but you'll visit our website and there is a map in the middle of the page that you can actually flip through and see if there is currently a hub that is serving your area. In some cases, if you're in a state such as Colorado, there is a hub that serves the entire state. In some cases, we have a state that has like 3 hubs that serve a smaller geographic region. And I would also want to know that every single hub, or even the consultants, if you aren't near a hub, they also generally offer a lot of other great services. So even if Service Enterprise maybe isn't quite right for you, they could still recommend other programs or training or things that they offer, consulting even, that would maybe be a benefit for your organization. Because if you're here, you're probably interested in some element of something they are offering. So, Service Enterprise isn't right for everybody, or maybe it's not right for you right now, and that's okay. So please, encourage you to contact them. And that's what Tracy mentioned. There's a readiness assessment and the conversation that can happen to really figure out what works best for your organization. Because again, we want to meet you where you are. And so if you go through that, you can see the hub. If there's one near you, awesome. Like click on the link and you can go to the website and contact them for more information. If there isn't, that's okay. Because as Tracy mentioned, we have independent consultants who can help cover those areas and offer virtual cohorts and training for those regions. And so you can go to the very bottom of the link and there's an information form, a little screen grab of it there on the right, and you can fill out that information form. It will be routed to me, and just make sure you include your city and your state if you want to save a little back and forth on email. And I'll be sure to look it up, make sure that you don't have a hub that might be helping your area, and I'll connect you to the appropriate resource to get more information about Service Enterprise and what might be a great fit for you. So I think at this point, we would love to move on to Q&A, and Tracy and I are happy to answer the questions.
So SJ, do you see a question in the chat from Wendy? A couple questions. I think SJ already answered your first question. If you fill out the form with your city and state, SJ will connect you with the appropriate either hub or an independent consultant. And as for the cohorts are put together by hubs in different ways. Each hub does it a little bit differently. Some hubs have themed cohorts or sort of subject area specific cohorts. So they may have one focusing on hunger, one and homelessness, one focusing on animals, that kind of thing. Other organizations or other hubs have cohorts that have a cross sector of organizations with lots of different service areas. And we had lots of great discussions among our hubs about there are tremendous benefits to both. So I wouldn't worry too much about the type of cohort you end up in. There are tremendous benefits from learning from organizations that are in a similar service area or vastly different service areas. It really works great either way.
Yes, and if there isn't a geographic hub in your area, then yes, members would likely be from across the country. But coincidentally, we have a few organizations that are interested in a part of Texas that's not currently served by the hub in Houston. And they had some, it was kind of the idea like, oh, maybe we'll put together a little bit of a Texas cohort with these two organizations. But they actually wanted to go through it independently. And that was just their preference. And so, that's the kind of things you want to talk about with your hub or the consultant to see, figure out what feels best for you. And, again, like Tracy said, if you have other pressing organizational, things going on, you might not want to be as beholden. You might want to set your schedule a little bit more to fit your needs. So there's some benefits either way. And as far as the fees associated, that is completely dependent on the consultant or the hub. And they all offer slightly different, consulting packages at the end or additional add-on opportunities. They might be subsidized by volunteer generation fund dollars, like if it was a state commission or something like that. And so that's going to vary widely. So when you connect, or when I help you connect with the correct hub or consultant, that's certainly a question that they're anticipating being asked, and we'll be happy to be completely transparent and give you all that information. And I see the follow-up for ballpark. It very literally varies from $300 to some thousands of dollars. It just depending on, if there have been funders that have supported it, BGF grants, whatever it might be. So, I will be happy to bridge that gap, get you connected so that you can get a more precise number for your budgeting purposes.
Other questions? You're welcome to unmute or type them in the chat. So in terms of in-person or virtual, they used to be mostly in-person. They have been mostly virtual over the last year and a half. So we have the curriculum available to the hubs, both for in-person delivery and for virtual delivery. Some hubs are doing sort of a hybrid version. So it can be either or both. Great questions, Wendy. Any other questions?
And again, you can use that form at the bottom of the page if you just want to ask some follow-on questions without necessarily getting connected. This isn't the only opportunity to ask questions if you think of something later, which I'm sure you will.
So great question from Lauren about the concrete benefits of certification. And there are both intrinsic and extrinsic benefits. The intrinsic benefits, I think we covered in some ways throughout the presentation, that it really is a wraparound change management program to help your organization think about, look at, and change the way that you engage volunteers, which truly does help these organizations increase their capacity. So that is the intrinsic benefit. You come out on the other side as a certified service enterprise with not only the tools, but the culture in your organization that allows volunteers to participate in ways perhaps you never even imagined in order to do your work even better and do more of it in the community. Some of the extrinsic benefits vary from hub to hub and geographic region. Some of the hubs maintain Service Enterprise Council meetings on a regular basis so that you can stay connected with other service enterprises to talk about how you're weathering certain storms. Obviously, in the last year, a lot of those conversations have centered around how do you keep volunteers engaged during a pandemic, but lots of other conversations about challenges that organizations are facing. And you have a network of high-performing organizations around volunteer engagement to bounce ideas off of, to share resources, forms, intake processes, that kind of thing. So it's a tremendous network in that way, both regionally and nationally. We're looking to add some additional education benefits to service enterprise organizations in the next year. We may be offering some regular learning opportunities for certified service enterprise organizations. That sort of thing that organizations can take advantage of once they're certified as well. We're always promoting the service enterprise certification, and it is becoming more and more recognized around the country. The more organizations that certify and proudly display and discuss the benefits of their certification with their communities and their funders, the more funders will understand what the benefits are of investing in that organization. And Points of Light is constantly having conversations with funders about the broader field and arena of volunteer engagement, and specifically about our service enterprise organizations, and why these are some really high-performing organizations in which to invest. SJ, anything else to add to that list?
No, I think that's a really good summary. Again, I just think it's, we have great case studies. We have tons of beautiful quotes that, it's really per organization, it's your transformation. And, and then obviously being connected to these wonderful hubs and consultants for all the other opportunities and insights and connections that they can help make with you as well. So I think you did a really good highlight there, Tracy.
Any other questions? All right. Well, SJ and I are happy to stick around for a few more minutes if you're shy and didn't want to ask a question in front of the whole group and want to ask us in just a minute after some folks log off. But SJ, is there anything else you want to say as we wrap up and give folks a quarter of an hour back in their day?
No, I just want to thank you for taking the time to join us. And I see a few of our familiar hub friends too. So it's always good to see you. And thank you for joining us. Please check out our site, review the resources on there, click around, and don't hesitate to fill out that form. And I'll be happy to make those connections for you. Tracy, thank you for the great overview. And, please reach out. Love to hear from you.
One other thing I thought of, if folks have questions, in addition to being connected with hubs, we can sometimes connect you with other certified service enterprises, which you can also search on the Points of Light website. But if you're looking for other rescue animal organizations that have certified, or other Habitat for Humanity organizations that have certified, we can connect you with some of those to talk about their experiences.
Great point.
Great. Have a great day, everyone. We hope to hear from you.
Thank you all.
I'd like to ask a question if you still have a moment.
We do. Oh, you're shy, huh, Maggie?
Oh, no,